All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to do something a little different. Instead of just talking about geopolitics, we're going to use a real-world, high-stakes situation to actually learn how to think strategically. And our case study? It's India, walking this incredibly tricky tightrope between two global superpowers. So let's get into it.
So here's the setup. You've got India's prime minister making a big visit to China right after coming back from Japan. Now, on the surface, it looks like just another diplomatic tour, standard stuff. But what's really going on here is this incredibly complex balancing act. It's a tightrope walk, and believe me, the whole world is watching.
And this is where we really have to put on our strategic thinking caps. Is this outreach to China a real shot at a new friendship, a genuine partnership, or is it some kind of strategic trap? See, to figure that out, you can't just read the headlines. You've got to go deeper. And that brings us to our very first principle of strategic thinking.
Okay, principle number 1. It's simple, but it's probably the most important. You have to challenge the narrative. Always question the story you're being told. Look, the media, they love a simple story, right? It's easy, it's clean, it sells. But the real world, it's messy, it's complicated. It is never that simple.
And just look at the buzzwords that get thrown around. Bonhomie, this dragon-elephant tango. Big, grand ideas like reshaping Asia. I mean, it all sounds so nice and tidy, doesn't it? It paints this really positive picture. And yeah, it's a great story. But a strategic thinker has to ask, is it the real story?
Boom. This quote just cuts right through all that fluff. Our source, Lieutenant General Shankar, basically says, hold on, what are we doing here? This is self-defeating. He points out that you don't see the Chinese media talking like this. It's a completely one-sided story. And that's exactly the point. The moment you challenge that simple, happy narrative, you're forced to start looking for the actual facts.
Okay, so if the story and the headlines is out, what's next? Well, here's principle 2. A strategic thinker never goes with their gut or with what feels right. They build their case, piece by piece, using cold, hard facts. And the best way to do that? A methodical comparison. So let's do one, right now. Let's put the USA and China side by side and see what the data really tells us.
Let's start at the most basic level, trust. And, well, there isn't any. Seriously, the source calls it a triangle of no trust. Think about it. India has deep-seated issues with China. It's got its own set of problems with the US, and of course the US and China are major rivals. The bottom line here, especially from the Chinese perspective, is that strategic mistrust is the baseline. This isn't some friendly dance. It's a high-stakes standoff where everybody is suspicious of everybody else.
Now let's add another layer. History. Let's look at the actual track record of conflict. And when you do, the difference is, wow, it's stark. On the China side, you have a clear pattern of direct physical conflict. We're talking a full-on war in '62, another clash in '67, and of course, the recent violence in Galwan. Now look at the US column. It's complicated, right? Sometimes they were helping Pakistan, India's rival, but other times, like in '99, they were actually helping India behind the scenes. The history tells two completely different stories. This is so important. A key part of strategic thinking is understanding that not all threats are created equal. You have to ask, what kind of threat are we talking about? And our source breaks it down like this. The threat from China is physical. It's about land. They occupy Indian territory, period. They also work with Pakistan, creating a two-front problem. The threat from the US? It's political. It's about control. They want an Indian government that does what they want it to do. See the difference? One is a threat to your borders, the other is a threat to your independence.
So that brings us to the big question. What's the end game here? What does each side actually want? According to the analysis, the US wants India to be a junior partner, a subjugal ally that it can basically manage. But China's goal? It's seen as much more fundamental. They want to keep India down, permanently, because they see a rising India as a long-term threat to their own power in Asia. You absolutely have to understand what your opponent's ultimate goal is before you can even think about your next move.
And for the last piece of our comparison, let's look beyond governments and armies. Let's talk about people. Because strategy isn't just about hard power. The connection between India and the US is rooted in shared values, to some extent, open, democratic societies. And you have this huge, successful, and growing Indian diaspora in America. Now compare that to China. It's a closed, communist system. There is virtually no Indian diaspora there. That massive difference in human connection, that's a huge strategic factor that you just can't ignore.
All right, so just to recap, we've challenged the media narrative. We've done a methodical, fact-based comparison.
Now for our third and final principle of strategic thinking. You have to understand the big picture. No country makes a move in a vacuum. You have to see the entire chessboard, the great game, that's being played all around you.
You've probably heard this term, the Great Game. Originally, it was all about the British and Russian empires fighting for control of Central Asia back in the 1800s. Well, today, we're in a new Great Game. The players are different, it's US, China, Russia, India, but the goals are exactly the same. It's a competition for influence, for resources, and for strategic positioning on the world map.
And where is the new center of gravity for this game? Central Asia. Why there? Simple. It's loaded with oil, gas, and all sorts of valuable minerals. But even more importantly, look at a map. It's the soft underbelly of both Russia and China. So when the US makes a play for influence there, it's not just about some far-off country. It's a direct challenge on the doorsteps of its biggest rivals. And this is the giant chessboard that India has to play on. Every single move has to take this larger game into account.
So, after all this, after challenging the narrative, comparing the facts, and looking at the big picture, where are we? Well, if you are hoping for a simple, easy answer, strategic thinking isn't going to give you one. What it does do is something much more important. It peels back all the layers of wishful thinking and exposes the cold, hard, difficult reality of the choice that has to be made. And here it is, the core dilemma, laid bare. This isn't a choice between a friend and a foe. It's much tougher than that. The source frames it as a choice between the enemy, that's China, a direct physical threat to your existence, and the inimical, that's the US. Not quite an enemy, but definitely not a friend. An adversarial power that wants to control you. I mean, what a choice to have to make, right? That is the brutal reality of walking the tightrope.
And just to add one final piece to the puzzle, listen to this quote from a Chinese academic. China is America's immediate rival, while India is the long-term challenger. This shows you how the other major players see the board. In their eyes, India isn't just some regional power anymore. It's the long-term player to watch. And that recognition, that single idea, is exactly why this great game is so intense. India's rise is now part of every single calculation that Washington and Beijing make. And that's where we'll leave it. Because strategic thinking can bring you clarity, it can show you the real choices, but it can't make the decision for you. The real question, as our source so brilliantly puts it, isn't about what you stand to gain. It's about what you're willing to pay. Because every move, every alliance has a price. In a world where there are no perfect answers, just a series of incredibly difficult trade-offs, how do you decide what price is worth paying? That's the ultimate strategic question.